You may call your first witness.
Your Honor, at this time the people would like to call Officer Ryan Foster to the stand.
Very well.
Anthony Juarez for the state. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Good morning, Officer Foster. Would you mind introducing yourself for the sake of the record?
My name is Officer Foster, Ryan Foster, F-O-S-T-E-R.
Officer Foster, what do you do for a living?
I'm a patrolman with the Midland Center Police Department.
Let's talk a little bit about what you do as a police officer. Have you received any sort of training to qualify you as a police officer?
Well, all officers with the Midland Center Police Department begin first with the orientation. We start with a 22-week course. Frequently it's called the Police Academy, where we learn about criminal procedures. They get us in shape. We learn about things like DUI investigations. And then there's continuing education while I was a member of the department. And through that, I actually got training in accident reconstruction as well.
Officer Foster, let's talk about why you're here in court today. Can you tell us why?
Yes, I was the first responding officer to the accident that evening.
So, Officer Foster, let's talk about that evening, September 24th, 2010. What time did you get to work?
I got the late shift that evening, so it was going to be 11 to 7. I arrived a few minutes after 11 at my post.
Can you tell us where your post was?
My post was Canyon Road. I was patrolling Canyon Road, but as the weather conditions got worse, I decided to actually park my vehicle at the corner of Chambers and Canyon.
Okay, you touched on weather conditions a little bit. Let's talk about those. Can you explain what the weather conditions were like that night?
Well, there was a big storm predicted for that night. When I first started my shift, it was only drizzling. By about 12:30, though, the floodgates opened. It was just pouring cats and dogs.
Mr. Foster, what happened that night as you were stationed at your post?
Well, initially I had set up, like I said, a post at Chambers and Canyon, and I was reviewing the cars as they came into town. I had my radar gun, and where I was parked is where the city kind of ends, and it goes into more of a urban trees and such kind of area. The road drops down to a single lane. Most of the cars, because of the rain, were traveling right around the speed limit with their hazard lights on, but there was one particular vehicle, a white Chevrolet Impala, that was going above the speed limit.
So, Officer Foster, what did you do after you noticed this white Chevrolet Impala was going over the speed limit?
Well, I got a radar gun reading of 54.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation.
As to?
The radar gun reading 54 miles per hour. There's been a lack of foundation under Davis v. Adams and Rule 702 that the radar gun is actually reliable and that's relied upon by officers in the field. Without this foundation, this testimony is inadmissible.
Your Honor, if you'd like, I could lay a foundation.
If you would do so.
Sure. Officer Foster, you mentioned the radar gun. Let's talk about this radar gun. Have you been trained in its use?
Yes, it is a standard issued device to all officers on patrol. It is used by all law enforcement when measuring speed. I've been trained extensively on how to operate the machine as well as how to calibrate my gun, and I calibrated mine that evening actually before I had gone out. I've never had a problem with getting accurate results with my particular radar gun.
Officer Foster.
Foundation has been laid.
So, Officer Foster, can you tell us again, when you used the radar gun, what happened?
Well, as I indicated, I got a radar gun reading of 54 miles per hour. That particular section of road is 35. I originally thought I was going to pull the vehicle over, but then I was called away to an officer in need of assistance down on Chambers Avenue. So rather than pulling the vehicle over, I went to that location instead.
So what happened as you got to the Chambers location?
I never actually made it to the Chambers location. Dispatch called me back and indicated that they needed a member of the fatal crash team, which is something I also do because of a single car collision back on Canyon Road. So I immediately clicked my lights on and headed back there.
All right, we'll get to your fatal crash team section of your job in a second. First, let's talk about when you got to the scene of the crash. What did you see?
Well, on the west side of the road, I found a white Chevrolet Impala that had crashed into a tree and a utility pole.
Were there any people around the vehicle?
Yes. Miss Danielle Dawson, the one over there in the gray suit, was outside of the vehicle, as well as a resident of that road, London Bennett. There were also two passengers still in the vehicle, Vanessa Sullivan and Miss Taylor Hobson.
So what, did you have any interaction with the defendant?
Yes, she identified herself as the driver of the vehicle. I asked her what had happened. She kept saying, blaming it on the rain. And then in the course of our conversation, she said something that stood out odd to me. She said, "I think I need another drink."
Officer Foster, you heard her say, "I think I need another drink." What did you do after that?
Well, after that, as part of my training, I know that we need to issue the field sobriety test. So I followed standard Midlands procedure, which is I called into my station and indicated that I would be performing the field sobriety test and to have an operator available for the breathalyzer machine. I then escorted Miss Dawson away from the scene to a safe location, which was London Bennett's driveway, where I performed the field sobriety test per my training.
All right, let's talk about these field sobriety tests, Officer Foster. Can you tell us which field sobriety tests you performed?
Yes, that particular evening I performed the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, the one-legged stand test, and the heel-to-toe test.
All right, let's break these tests down one by one. First of all, the horizontal gaze nystagmus test. What does this test entail?
Well, the horizontal gaze nystagmus test is basically an eye test. We use a stimulus, in this case it was my finger. I hold it in front of the person approximately 6 to 12 inches, and first just have them stare at it while holding their hands head still. What I'm looking for is a jerking of the eye, or nystagmus. The second step is we move the finger to the left and to the right, and I'm looking for the eye to follow smoothly. Finally, what I'm looking for is what angle does the eye begin to jerk, or the onset of nystagmus.
So when Miss Danielle Dawson had this test performed, what were the results?
Well, in holding the finger directly in front of her, she had a pronounced jerk in the eye.
Objection, Your Honor. There's a lack of foundation for this officer to make this conclusion as well. May I be heard?
I'm sorry, there's a lack of foundation for what?
For this conclusion to be made for this testing, Your Honor.
For the conclusion, you mean his observations
For
of
his
the jerking
observation
of the eye?
test. Yes, Your Honor. May I be heard?
Maybe heard, Your Honor.
Well, I think he gets to be heard first. Yes, let's hear from you first.
Your Honor, under Rule 702, we need to know how reliable this test is, whether or not he has sufficient facts and data to perform this test, and whether or not this test was applied reliably in this case. For him to testify as to how Ms. Dawson did on that day, we need to know more about this test. He can simply state that, her eyes jerk, but we don't know how reliable this is, how it might prejudice the jury. We have no idea what this test entails.
I'm sorry, how reliable what is? His observation that the eyes jerked?
Correct, Your Honor. This is horizontal gaze nystagmus test that he's talking about.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Yes.
We've qualified this witness as a police officer. We have on the record that this witness has been a police officer for 10 years. This witness has gone through a 22-week course as a police officer. This witness was telling you what a horizontal gaze nystagmus test entails. He's going to then tell you how the defendant performed. From there, the jury can assess his testimony. We're not asking him to come to any conclusion about whether or not the defendant was drunk, whether or not anything like that. We're just asking him what he
Really,
saw.
you're not going to ask him to come to a conclusion as to whether her performance on the field sobriety test would indicate that she was impaired while driving?
No, Your Honor. We're going to leave those dots for the jury to connect.
Your Honor, may I be heard as well?
Yes.
We're not questioning this officer's experience. We're questioning.
Okay, so you're conceding that he was experienced in performing field sobriety tests?
I'm conceding the fact that he's an experienced police officer. I'm just questioning the validity of the horizontal gaze nystagmus test.
Your Honor,
Would
if
you
you'd like, I
like to
can ask
respond to
one simple question to establish the validity of these tests, if you'd like.
One question. All right, I'll hear your one question. I will hold ruling on your objection in abeyance until I hear the one question and the answer.
Sure. Officer Foster, are field sobriety tests a standard in law enforcement?
Yes, field sobriety tests are performed by law enforcement throughout the entire country, and I've received significant training from the Midland Center, City of Midland Center, for how to perform these tests and how to make assessments from these tests.
Your Honor, I renew my objection.
On what grounds?
Under Rule 702, it states that...
Why don't I look at Rule 702 that you
Yes,
keep
Your Honor.
referring to?
Your Honor.
Sure, and you have it handy. Thank you.
Might play in the middle.